Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now, it took a matter of hours after Helldivers 2 was released before people on Reddit were asking about how they might achieve a look like this on their Imperial Guard and similar miniatures. So I thought to myself, well, geez, that's pretty easy. Now, black and grey and black, it can be pretty dull when it's done completely flat. So I'm going to show you a couple of tricks here to enliven all of those areas of black against one another. Now there'll also be links in the description to where you can go find the miniature for this. This is a 3D printed STL, came up of my Mars 3, and it is from Skullforge Miniatures, who do quite a range of really awesome kits. I'll make sure that there's links and what have you. All of the paints for this one will likewise be listed in the description below. So let's get started. So once you've got your miniature assembled, whether it be a print or a Kasrkin or something that you want to paint up in this style, first thing to do is to prime them. Now this fella here I have used Mechanicus Standard Grey because, well, yellow and black both have this funky reputation for being a little difficult to paint, and we're going to throw that out the window. Don't start from black from this though. Trust me, a grey is going to be much easier. Now real quick up top, just side by side, the Skullforge miniatures, you know, they are scaled a little closer for like Star Wars Legion and such. If you wanted to make these guys work as Kasrkin, maybe scale them to about 96%. They're still going to be slightly bigger than your regular Cadians, but they're Helldivers. They're going to look cool. So what I'm preparing here, this is one of my little makeup brushes, although you can just as easily use a dry brush if you fancy. And this is Administratum Grey. Now previously you might have seen me doing this using Althuan Grey for black, but I don't want the uniform to be quite as blue when I'm finished. So you'll see that I'm passing over the same area several times. Let's get that in shot properly. And building up the color. So I've got a bit of texture, and it is more of a mid-tone gray, actually quite a light gray, than it is from our primer. Now I'm going to do this to the entire miniature. Now that includes the cape, the armor, everything. And while this is predominantly so that we have easier clothing to paint, it's also going to come in handy when we come to paint the armor. You'll see what I mean when we get to that bit. But take your time. And as always with dry brushing, it is better to have too little paint on your brush and have to go back over the same area a few times, or even add more paint to your brush, than it is to have too much and just paint the whole thing white in one go. Now some of you are going to be looking thinking, gosh, it looks a little bit dusty, but that is what I want. I want that texture. That's really going to help sell the look of the cloth uniform. Now what we're going to do is much the same thing again now, except this time I'm using white and a smaller brush. This time I want to concentrate just towards areas that are likely to catch the light a little bit more, and I don't want quite so much on my brush. And don't forget to do this across the armor as well. And you'll see I'm angling the miniature so that I don't have to worry too much about catching flatter areas of the cape here. So around all of the bits I want to have a nice pronounced edge. Here we go. Now that we've got the basis down for our uniform, what we're going to move to now, this is Ancient Honey from the Army Painter. It might seem a bit of a funny one to be doing this before the black, but that's half the reason we're doing it now, is because it's going to be easier to lay this down than it would be to come back and try and paint yellow over black. We're going to do it in reverse, essentially. So all of the trim that you want to be yellow. This is quite similar to, what is it, Ironjaw's Yellow from Citadel. So if you want to stick to contrast, you can do that. And this little splurge of color will work not just on the uniform, but any bits of armor that you want to yellow up as well. Remember that they tend to be the same sort of color. So the only bit you really need to worry about not hitting at this stage is anything that's going to be black clothing. If I splurge a little and I hit the armor, I'm not all that fussed. Particularly these big whopping sides of his head, just splat down your yellow stripes like so. You'll see why in a minute. So, all of the yellow, as much of this as you fancy. Let's go! And as you might see, you can get pretty messy with that. I haven't done a lot with the cape. I would suggest if you wanted to do a slightly more intricate design, swapping to something like Bad Moon's Yellow, like a true acrylic, and painting your design on would be a little bit more fitting. I'm just rushing through it here. What I'm going to do now is very much a case of the right tool for the job. So we are going to jump around between manufacturers. What I mean by that is we're going to start with Grim Black from the Army Painter for his clothing. Now this is a flat black. There isn't really a lot of color to it. As it goes on, you'll see it's going to be pretty ordinary, but it will work super well with our pre-shade to give us a bit of volume and a bit of depth to the uniform. So take your time with this, and I'm now going to go around carefully, pretty much everything. If I'm angling him to paint, the only thing I'm still not worried about hitting is going to be his armor. So if I am positioning the model to try and do something, I'm going to keep my brush moving towards any armored sections if I can, because those we're going to tidy up later. How quick he starts looking finished. Now what I'm going to swap to is Black Templar, and this is from Citadel. This one it was the first of the sort of contrast blacks, and it has a very faint blue tint to it. So I'm using this for all of the leather details. So his gloves, his boots, his equipment pouches and such like that, and I'm also going to paint in his cape with this. Now it won't look all that different going on, but trust me, once this dries, it's going to have a very subtle bluish tint, which will make it stand out from the other black we've just painted on. Now my radiator is singing to me, so if you hear strange noises, I am fine, I'm still alive. But I'm realizing that I probably should have done those back to front. Looking at them, I think the Black Templar might have been better on the clothing than the leather, and the Grim Black vice versa. Now the cape is a little bit patchy. That's in part because I wasn't using a large enough brush for this big area when applying the contrast, but I've got plans for this later, so I'm not too concerned by that. What I am going to move to now, this is Black Grey. This is a Vallejo color, and this is the first of our sort of traditional acrylics we're going to be painting with. Now this I'm going to apply over the armor, and this is where we want to slow down a little bit. You could here use a true black, but instead I'm sticking to, again, something which isn't black. This is a really dark grey, so that when we shade it, we've still got a little bit of depth. Now take your time here, because this is one where tidying up is what you want to try and avoid. But slowly, slowly, around all of the armor plates, let's paint this in. Now it doesn't look particularly inspiring yet, but we're getting there with the armor. What I'm going to do now is to essentially paint in the stripes on his helmet. So we have yellowed it in to start off with. What I'm going to do now, I find it easiest to start from front to back. So angle your miniature so that you're just drawing your brush in one direction, and don't start from where you want the stripe to be. Start near to it and bulk it out as you go. So I'm going to now carefully, oh I hate doing this, freehanding stripes always give me the willies. But yeah, I'm now going to paint in the sides of the helmet. Now, I do usually recommend using true blacks very sparingly, but I have here black from Vallejo, and we're going to go straight over his rifle with this. Now at this stage, that is going to look quite flat and boring, so this is where our shade comes in. I'm going to use here Dark Tone from the Army Painter. You could just as easily use Neon Oil or something similar, but I want a nice, strong black recess, so Dark Tone's my choice. Now this is going to dry a little bit, what's the word, a little bit glossy, but I am not worried about that. As a matter of fact, it's going to suit me down to the ground. I'm also going to paint this quite carelessly where I come near the yellow. I'm not worried about running over that because we're going to highlight that in a little bit, but making sure that all of the armor gets a decent splattering of this shade. Now this stage might seem slightly foolish, being as I've just gotten a bit of a lacquered finish to the armor that I want, but I'm going to go over the entire miniature here with a matte varnish. Reason being is I want the texture between the cape, the armor, and the clothing to be a little bit different. And as well, it's going to help when it comes to doing some of the highlights. Now we are going to essentially varnish the armor a second time once we've done something to it, and you'll see as we get to that. Not only will that improve the look of all of the soft details, but it's going to make it easier to see what we're doing. I'm now going to turn to steel. This is a Vallejo Model Air color, although any bright silver will do perfectly well. A very fine brush, and what I'm going to do now, once push that out of the way so that stops flickering, I'm going to start doing some tiny little chips and lines along some of the edges of the armor. Anywhere where you want to accentuate the shape of the outline, or you think it would look cool if this caught a bit of action, a bit of dinging up. Now this, honestly, you can't really go overboard with. It will look cool as hell. Try and follow, God, if you can see that on the camera at all, try and follow some of the scratches in the armor too. And keep your paint nice and fluid, otherwise you're going to struggle a little like I am there to get it off the brush. So little chips just to accentuate some of the edges of that armor, make it look a bit more metallic. Now that's a method which is pretty useful for getting a highlight on almost any metallic stuff. It does merit a little bit of practice because you are working with quite small details a lot of the time. What I'm going to move to now is moon dust from the Army Painter, which I always enjoy saying, moon dust. And I'm going to paint in just a few little highlights at the corners and edges of the yellow details. And I'm going to do this on both the armor and the clothing, because all of the stuff that I've seen, the color tends to be more or less identical across both of these. Now you might recall me mentioning that cape. What I'm going to do is get a nice soft makeup brush, and the softer the better here. I'm going to load it up with a little bit of Althune Grey, and I really want to work this into the bristles and make sure that when I actually come to dry brush with this, next to nothing is coming off. So we're going to dry brush lightly across the edge of the base to get a feel for what we're going to leave behind, and that's probably still a little too much. Good thing I tried that at first. But once you're satisfied, grab your cape and start by lightly dragging across those raised areas. And you'll see I do get a little bit of dust coming off, but that is fine. That's kind of what I want. Just adjusting my angle occasionally to get a nice whitish blue highlight on the cape. I don't need to fuss any more than this. Now that looks a little more rough on the camera than it does in reality, but I'm not too fussed. I like how that looks. The last thing I'm going to do is to apply a satin varnish to the armor. Now you could use a gloss. I tend not to like the look very much. I think it's just a little too much at this scale. Whereas a satin varnish, once this dries, is going to give us that semi-gloss, which looks a little more reasonable, I think. Now that slight shine I really think adds a lot, but what was I thinking? There is one more detail that I need to touch up. So I'm going back to my white because nothing says we're the good guys like bright white skulls all over your armor. Anyhow, once I'm done with this, what I'm going to do is go ahead, put a simple base on them, and for a miniature which has such a simple color scheme as this guy actually does, a base with a little bit of color on it is not going to go awry. It'll help sell the look of the armor. So the recipe for that one will be in the description. Let's get a look at what our heck jumper or Helldiver, whatever you want to call him, what he looks like when he's all finished. And so, there at last, our Helldiver, heck jumper, whatever you want to call him, is complete, ready to spread managed democracy throughout the galaxy. Now, like I said, black on black, it can be pretty dull, but with a little flash of color on the base, you know, as someone who has played Iron Hands for a very long time can tell you, it makes a world of difference. So I will make sure that there are links to where you can pick these guys up, remembering that they are from the welcome pack from the Skullforge Patreon, which is pretty handy. As well, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Your folks' support is really what keeps this channel going. I wouldn't still be doing it without yours. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.